As we continue our off-season shows, we welcome in an LA media veteran to talk about the past and present of the Los Angeles Kings, a conversation with Ted Sobel on this episode of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 16 years, and of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for the past 30 years. If you are an everydayer, those that listen and watch every day, you know I try and get some different voices and different perspectives on the LA Kings on this show. And we're excited to be joined for the first time by an award-winning LA sports radio reporter and anchor, also author of the book Touching Greatness. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But if you listen to the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs on the radio, you can hear him as your studio host for the Sports USA Live Network. He is Ted Sobel. Hey, Ted, how are you?
Great, Eddie. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I always love talking Kings hockey. I remember going back to 1969-70. So that's a long time ago. And we had some weird years in those days under Jack Kent Cook, but that's how far I go back with this team.
Well, I am definitely going to ask you about that, but we were at Game 6 for the LA Kings against the Edmonton Oilers, and we struck up a conversation, and I've seen you around before, but I know you had given me your information saying you'd love to be on the show at some point, and so we're glad to have you. Now, I was reminded about you, though, Ted, because I was driving into work the other night. As you know, I work overnights, and I turned on the NHL Network, and lo and behold, we had a 4 overtime game between the Panthers and Hurricanes, and there you were, again, working for the Sports USA Live Network as the studio host. What's it like to have to do in-between period reports for 2 games, basically?
Well, it's the first time I've ever done any game on any planet that lasted that long. It was 6 hours and 46-minute broadcast from my 30-minute pregame show until I finally shut my mouth and told everybody good night. So it was a long, long night for everybody. No complaints. It was a lot of fun to be around. My biggest problem was, Eddie, as you know, preparing for anything for the next day. If you got to do it, I didn't prefer doing it after about 2:30 or 3 in the morning. Have to turn that around for a quick because we're doing every single game in the conference final. So that wasn't the fun part, but hey, it was a heck of a hockey game, that's for sure.
And by the way, our own Jim Fox also a part of
Yes.
those broadcasts for the Carolina Florida series as well.
Yep.
Now I've started to hear some comparisons of this year's Florida Panthers to the 2012 LA Kings. Just getting in the playoffs, winning a ton of road games, got a standout goalie in net. Have you heard or thought about that as well?
I've actually mentioned it a couple of times in my pregame show because I lived that 2012 season. I was at every single Stanley Cup final game. So, yeah, there's a lot of comparisons. Obviously, it's a little weird when you think about how Florida got in because it was the last couple of days when they squeaked in because other teams lost.
Yes.
I think specifically, if I remember, it was the Penguins.
Yep.
Well, all they had to do was win one game, and we would have no discussion of the Panthers right now.
Yeah, they might have to send some of those Penguins players a little playoff share.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it truly is a great comparison. And when you think about, and I mentioned in tonight's pregame show, which I've mostly written, that Bobrovsky is the closest thing to Vasilevsky and Quick over the last decade that we have seen one guy carry a team. Although in Vasilevsky's situation, that team is a lot deeper when they won the Cup than I think any of the Kings teams were. But still, one thing's for sure: if you have a hot goaltender, you can go a long way.
Well, talking about the LA Kings over the years,
Yes.
I think there's 3 eras kind of Kings hockey. You've got obviously the old forum blue and gold, Marcel Dion, Rogie Vachon. You've got the Gretzky era, which is what I'm a part of, Luke Robitaille. And then you've got the Stanley Cup era with Brown and Kopitar, Quick, Doughty. You mentioned you go back to the old Forum Blue and Gold days. I'm surprised that I've actually had listeners and viewers, because you think podcasts and YouTube channels, maybe that's a younger generation of people, but we've had people that do go back to those days. As a matter of fact, we had a listener last week, Scott from Simi Valley, who said he was a fan since Giles Marat, Denny Maloney, and Cowboy Flett.
Gilles Marat.
See,
Yeah.
I don't even know Cowboy
Yes.
Flett.
Gilles Marat. You don't know Cowboy Flett?
I don't.
Oh, you got to know him. You're not allowed to be a Kings fan then.
No, that's harsh. But educate me then. Educate me.
Okay, let me tell you something. At the beginning, literally from the beginning, from the first season, Jack Kent Cooke was so paranoid, and I strongly use that word, about making sure that the 12 hockey fans in Los Angeles cared about his team, that he had nicknames for everybody, and he created a lot of them. And that's why you hear in the past Bill Cowboy Flett, Eddie the Jet Joyelle, Frenchie Lemieux, all these old names. Those were all Jack Kent Cooke creations, which is pretty funny when you think that's the owner of the team. By the way, here's something I bet you don't know, and if you do, I'll be extremely impressed. Okay. You know that music that your organist plays? You know the song I'm talking about?
I know, because Dieter Rule has been a guest on this show, and it was written by Jack Kent Cooke.
Thank you very much. I think I told Dieter that, but I could be wrong. Anyway, but do you know that Jack Kent Cooke was a wishful musician in his early days? He wanted, yes, that was his hopeful career. It worked out better because he ended up making millions and buying teams in the Washington Redskins old days and all that stuff. But yeah, so that's all the way back to the start of there. So one thing's for sure, Mr. Cooke, and still has the greatest stories as Bob Miller. So you may or may not have had Bob before, but if you get him on the show, you got to ask him about those old days, because he is the greatest storyteller of all time, and so many fun times from those days. Not so fun if you lived it at the time, if you were Bob, because Jack Kent Cooke was trying to control everybody. Even while you were on the air, he would call you during a commercial break. Why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? But that's paranoia in those days.
Well, there were some lean years for the Kings when they started out, but obviously
not the first year.
Yeah. But the big moment, though, for the Kings organization, when Wayne Gretzky came to town, and I was in college at the time. I know you were here, so I have to ask you, what was it like in Los Angeles when Wayne Gretzky was traded to the Kings?
Okay, I wasn't just here. I was at the news conference, so and then interviewed Wayne afterwards. And by the way, Wayne is an incredible person, let alone forget the hockey stuff. I mean, we had a wonderful working relationship, and yet he's gone out of his way to be one of the endorsers of my book. So how nice is that? I mean, you're talking about a special guy there. But that day, I will never forget. It was at the airport hotel right down the street from LAX, and it was a zoo. And it wasn't just hockey reporters there. It was a little, I think, Entertainment Tonight was there, and that kind of stuff, because it was a really big happening. And even then, it was like, okay, well, it's still hockey. It's not a big deal in Los Angeles. Well, that day, it changed everything. And as you know, and every local, any hockey fan knows now, that particular trade changed the entire hockey. We wouldn't have Florida Panthers to talk about if it wasn't for Wayne Gretzky. So, it just changed everything in the South of the U.S. And it was something about that day. I remember when Wayne was crying on stage at the podium, thinking, I just can't believe all this is happening. It just hit him all at once. And Mr. Jerry Buss was there too, because he was part owner of the team at the time. And or maybe a minority owner, and he came on, and he was a huge part of that trade. I think a lot of people forget. He tried to get that deal done before he sold the team, and it didn't happen, but he was still sort of in the discussion of that happening. So I don't think Bruce McNall ever would have made that deal if it wasn't for Jerry Buss. But that particular day, it was an event. It wasn't just a news conference. One of the greatest news conferences I've ever been a part of.
Well, the Kings did not win a Stanley Cup with Wayne Gretzky. They did go to the final in '93. That was actually the first year I really became a hardcore Kings fan because I found out what playoff hockey was all about.
Yes.
Remember the Game 7 in Toronto with Gretzky getting the hat trick, and from there I was sold on the great sport of hockey.
Yeah.
We're
By
gonna
the
have,
way,
yeah,
that Game 7, excuse me,
yeah.
I still think it's the greatest playoff game I've ever seen. To this day. It was unbelievable, the pressure. And I'm one of these guys. I've even joked on the pregame show a few times on Sports USA. I'm one of these guys for years have always stressed home ice is the least important thing in all the team sports, specifically in the playoffs. And I get laughed at all the time. You don't know what you're talking about, the last line change and all that. Well, I think it's still 10 games over 500, the road team in these playoffs. Okay. It's a total different animal.
Yeah.
And that game for the Kings to win in Toronto, in especially in Toronto of all places, Gretzky gets the hat trick. He calls that the greatest game he ever played. And it really was a special time. And if we're looking back on that Marty McSorley stick, we would be talking about the 3 Stanley Cups the Kings had. But that's another story.
I'd rather we not talk about that. And speaking of road wins, the 2014 LA Kings winning all the Game 7s on the road certainly would attest to that. We're going to have more with Ted Sobel in a moment. Going to ask him about the Kings winning their 2 Stanley Cups. But I need to let you know real quick that today's episode of Locked on LA Kings is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is the perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part you get will fit right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, look for a green check mark, and you know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop at eBay Motors, with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it is easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, at the right price on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. More with longtime LA sports reporter Ted Sobel. And I have always heard that, as you mentioned, Wayne Gretzky doesn't come to LA. There's no Ducks, there's no Sharks, Coyotes, Golden Knights. And you really do believe that's accurate.
Absolutely. Oh, there's no doubt about it. I think anybody who lived that era would totally agree with it, because it changed the landscape of, now there is this ultra superstar who people want to see. And it was starting to grow, but we also had the Atlanta Thrashers then that came into the league, Arizona, obviously, San Jose as well, all those teams. But I worked for the Ducks for the first season as I was on their inaugural telecast. I always joke that I was the third man in, and then I got a career misconduct after that. But so I only did one game, the inaugural game, but there was something about, I remember talking to Michael Eisner of Disney, who started the franchise for the Mighty Ducks, about that. And it was all about Gretzky. It was all about the interest. You had inline hockey that got big in Southern California immediately after that. And high schools and now colleges were starting to say, hey, we're not just, one of these teams that just guys hanging out together. It became a real structured thing, and it's grown like crazy. And now how many guys are from LA or Southern California in the NHL even? A few of them, right? Born and raised here. I think in those days it was like, what? That would be impossible. So no, it changed everything. And he's not called the Great One by accident.
So we're coming up on the 11-year anniversary of the Kings finally winning a Stanley Cup. Of course, they won it 2 years later as well. And in this town, being here a long time, to get attention, you got to win. And the Kings had a nice following, but once they finally won a couple of titles, it certainly made them relevant in a place like Los Angeles, right?
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. But you got to win. And the Kings were always thought of as, you had the small niche that followed them. And then it was like, but they've never won anything, and they're just another team in this town. But it changed a lot of things. And now I think I'm trying to remember the timing of it, but I seem to recall that was about the timing of all the sellouts as well. Where you just knew that almost every game was going to be a sellout for the entire season, no matter if it was who coming in on a Tuesday night. So we never used to have that for sure. And I think just the the strength of winning does so much more in Los Angeles than most other sports towns. And, the way they won too, it started to catch everybody's eyes, and Quick was unbelievable. I mean, at the time, and well, actually, when you look at it, he's a top handful of great playoff goaltenders ever. And that run that he gave us was as good as it gets.
Well, we talked about how some of that era is starting to fade, if you will. Dustin Brown has retired. Jonathan Quick is gone. Don't know if he'll play again next season. And Kopitar and Doughty are still around, but obviously they're winding down their careers. How do any of those players rank in the history of the Kings as far as all-time great Kings? Obviously, Gretzky would be probably the most influential. And I never saw Marcel Dion, unfortunately. I've heard he was just amazing. But some of these new Kings that we've seen, Kopitar, Brown, those guys, where do you think they fit into kind of the history of the Kings?
Well, it's also a different world now, because then we didn't say, if you were really a great player, we're going to get you a statue out front of your building. Right now, it looks like a wax museum or something when you walk in, right? There's so many statues.
It's a little much. Yeah, it's a little much.
I think it's way too much. It's like the Night of the Living Dead. If it's really late at night, you walk past there. But I don't know if any of them really deserve a statue. But I guess these days, if you win a cup, you deserve something. So they gave Dustin Brown is not a Hall of Fame player, right? How many Hall of Fame, non-Hall of Famers have a statue out in front of a building? It's a little weird, but that's how important that cup is to this franchise. And I get it. And he was the captain, and it makes a lot of sense. But to me, Jonathan Quick should have been the guy who got the first one. They could have waited until he retired, given him the statue holding up the cup. And that would have made more sense to me. But I got no problem with Dustin, because he's a great guy and he's a great leader, and he deserves a lot of the credit as well. But none of these guys are all-timers. None of them. Kopitar's fantastic player, probably going to make the Hall of Fame. I think a little bit underrated nationally, because, well, we're always going to have that, because half the nation's sleeping when the Kings are playing, so they don't see him play every night. But he's one of the better all-around players in the last few decades, with his defensive style of forward as well. And the guy just doesn't make too many mistakes. He just comes in, plays his shift, does what he needs to do, and produces night after night after night. And he's still doing it. I think even this year, it surprises me. I didn't go to that many games this year, but it looks like he hasn't lost anything. I mean, he looks like he's the same guy, which actually surprises me a little bit. But he's not an all-time great player, but he's an all-time king. Right. And that's important around here.
The Kings obviously have come out of a recent rebuild to be relevant again. They made the playoffs 2 years in a row, but out in the first round 2 years in a row. Do you feel like they're moving in the right direction, or is it still too soon to tell?
You know what? I actually think they're ahead of the curve in this. I didn't expect them to be this good this quick. And even though, they went out in the first round, there's something about, I like the depth of the team. They still need a little bit more defense. There's no doubt about it. And you could see Drew Doughty has lost a couple of steps. He's not the same guy anymore. He also, forget the skating ability, he made some un-Doughty-like mistakes in that Edmonton series, giving up the puck in his own zone, something that I don't remember ever seeing him do, maybe twice in a game before, and he did it a couple of times where he just was a little slow in his own end. And I'm not saying skating, but decision making, and just turned the puck over. And it cost them a few times in that series badly. But he's still a heck of a player, but he's not what he was. And that's not the kind of guy you replace very easily. So they need to get somebody who's the anchor of that defense for the next several years. And he's not on this team right now. And I don't know, maybe I'm sure you know more about what's going on down in Ontario and some other guys that are developing. But do you see any Doughties on the doorstep?
Well, I would suggest if Brant Clark is on the team next year, which I think he's going to, come out to crypto.com arena and check this guy out. I think he's the next future star.
Oh, great. But is he ready, though?
We'll see. We'll see. I think he's going to play with the Kings next season. We're going to have more with Ted Sobel. Want to ask him about his book in just a moment, but I do need to let you know that today's episode of Locked On LA Kings, your team every day, brought to you by Birddogs. Now, what is that? Well, it's going to sound weird, but they're shorts with underwear built in them, kind of like a bathing suit, but way better. They are incredibly comfortable. And if you're somebody like me who's really into comfort, you're going to love Birddogs. Here's the thing, they look good too. My wife cares way more about how I look than I do, and she likes them. So they're good enough to wear out to a nice dinner, but feel great enough to work out in, walk around all day in, do whatever you want to. The man in your life would love Birddogs as a gift, and guys, your significant other will love these because again, they're the best of both worlds. They look good and they're comfortable. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. When you enter your promo code LockedOnNHL, they will throw in a free custom Birddog Yeti style tumbler with every order. Again, that's birddogs.com, birddogs.com. Enter the promo code LockedOnNHL for your free gift. All right, wrapping it up with longtime sports reporter Ted Sobel here in Los Angeles. And being an LA-based broadcaster, I know of a certain age, we got to enjoy Vin Scully, Chick Hearn, and you mentioned him earlier, Bob Miller. I never had a chance to meet Chick or Vin. I know you did, but I have met Bob, and what an incredibly nice man. Maybe he gets a little overshadowed by those other two, but a Hall of Famer. Along with those guys as well. Any good Bob Miller stories, or maybe just a comment on that era of great voices in Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, Bob is obviously an anchor of that Mount Rushmore of broadcasters in LA in the history. I don't have any specific personal stories, except for maybe only the most important thing in my life. And that's Bob Miller opened the door to my job at the University of Wisconsin announcing hockey there in 1979. If it wasn't for Bob, I never would have happened.
I saw the Wisconsin football helmet up there behind you. Very nice.
Yeah, well, that's my only ties to Wisconsin, by the way. In 1978, I was doing minor league hockey back in New England, and I came back after a very disappointing first full year as a broadcaster, mostly because of the ownership, and it was the year after Slapshot was made. How many times have you seen that movie?
Many times.
Okay, well, I lived it. That league was the same league as Slapshot, but 2 years later. Okay, that I was in. So some crazy times there. But if not for Bob, I don't know where I would be right now, because he opened the door. He heard my tapes. He liked them, fortunately. And when I came back from Cape Cod in 1979, I saw him at a Kings preseason game. I just happened to go to the Forum, walked in, and Bob said, "Oh, how did it go back east?" And I said, "Well, it was great, but it was lousy, and I'm not going back, and the team is moving, and it was just chaos, and I'm done with it." And he says, "Oh, did you hear about the opening at Wisconsin?" That's the only reason I knew about it. We didn't have the internet, folks, then, right?
Yeah.
Let me just Google some openings here.
Yeah.
No, Google was something you did in bed when you were dribbling out of your mouth, I think. Anyway, so Bob said, "There's an opening there. Call this guy at this radio station. Tell him I told you to call, and just see what happens."
Wow.
I called the guy up, and he says, "Bob Miller told you to call?" He says, "What time can you be here?" I sent him a cassette tape. Yes, a cassette.
Yeah.
If anybody knows what that is. And I shipped it overnight. And a couple days later, they said, "We're going to fly you out here to talk to you." Like, wow, that was great. And I'd never seen a college hockey game in my life, Eddie.
Wow.
Ever. We didn't have college hockey in LA in 1979.
I'm hoping one day, you got Arizona State starting that program.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get USC and UCLA involved at some point. And if they go to the Big Ten, right? Who knows?
Yeah. But
right?
they only had club teams then.
Yeah.
They didn't have around here, nothing. There were only 4 ice rinks in Southern California in those days. So that wasn't going to happen. Anyway, so I showed up, and half the conversation in the interview was, "What's it like? How do you know Bob Miller?" He was literally the Vin Scully of Madison, Wisconsin.
Awesome.
And that's got me my job there.
Now, I know you've written a book. It's called Touching Greatness, Tales from the Front Row with Heroes and Legends. And you've got some LA greats on the cover, including Wayne Gretzky. Yeah. Any few tales of greatness that you can share with us as we close it out about the LA Kings?
Yeah, well, the Gretzky stuff is my favorite, because going back with Wayne from the start, literally from that day, and I interviewed him many times when he came in with Edmonton, but that day when he became a King, it changed everything from a local standpoint and coverage as well. But I have a fun story, a couple of them with Wayne in the book. One of them, how I developed my business card, and it was 1993, or it was either 92 or 93. It skips my mind now, but he had a really bad back, and he was extremely lucky to have Dr. Robert Watkins, whose son did my back last year. But the original Dr. Watkins, he did Wayne's back, and he saved his career because at that time, they thought it might be over. He sat out for quite a while. Well, while he was sitting out, I had this picture taken by the Kings photographer with Wayne in front of his locker when he broke Gordie Howe's record of 802 goals. And we don't take pictures in locker rooms, as you know, with a media credential. But Wayne said, "Hey, Ted, you're the only guy I didn't take a picture with. Come over here." So that was funny and nice of him. It's like, okay, if you said it, I guess it's okay. Anyway, the photographer took the picture. A week later, he gave me a copy of the picture. I showed it to Wayne. He says, "Oh, that's great." And I said, I was thinking of putting that on the back of my business card. And he goes, "That's a great idea." He goes, "Well, we'll talk about it." So anyway, a couple of weeks, months later, I brought it in. And during a game, Eddie, Wayne takes me while he's hurt, so he's not playing, right? He says, "Let's meet between periods down by the locker room." So after the second period of a midweek game, whenever it was, he says, "Come into the locker room with me, and we're going to do something I'm going to sign something on the picture for the back of your card." And I said, "I can't go in that locker room. It's during the game." He goes, "You're with me, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but you're not going to lose your job, but I'll lose my credential for a lifetime." He goes, "Don't worry." And so anyway, that's the kind of guy he was. Signed the picture. And my choice is Ted Sobel, Wayne Gretzky, 99. And I used that to try to get my hockey jobs. By the way, it never worked. But that's one of the stories in the book, how that evolved.
How can they get the book? Amazon, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, Amazon. Touching Greatness on Amazon, and it's a lot of fun. But it's not just sports. There's a lot of things. It's growing up in the 60s, and a lot of music in there and stuff, and entertainment, and what LA was like in those days leading up into the rest of my crazy life.
Well, Ted, great getting to touch base with you. I'm glad we got to chat at Game 6, and you gave me your card and had you on the show. It was very entertaining. We could talk, I'm sure, for many hours about different things, but glad to have you on. Appreciate your time, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We got conference hockey tonight, so let's go for it.
Yeah, check out Ted Sobel, Jim Fox, and everybody else on the Sports USA Live Network. You can follow Ted on Twitter, by the way, at Ted Sobel Sports, and check out sobelsports.com. Thanks again, Ted. Have a great broadcast tonight. We'll talk to you later.
Appreciate it.
All right. That was Ted Sobel. Great to have him on. Really appreciate his time. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as well. Before we close it out, again, you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch every day, looking ahead to tomorrow's show, we continue our look back at the past season for the LA Kings, focusing on a different player. Tomorrow, it's going to be forward Gabe Vilardi. We'll also update you on the 4 players for the LA Kings organization that are playing in the World Championships. Quarterfinals start up early tomorrow morning. Friday, of course, will be our weekly Kings fan feedback show. Highly encourage you to get your emails in now. Keep those feedback shows going strong in the offseason. We can't do it without your emails. The email address, lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. Anything we've talked about during the week of shows, anything you want to talk about, always you're welcome, your comments as well. And on the YouTube channel, you can just leave your comments down below as well. Also, stay interactive with the show on Twitter. We're at Locked On LA Kings on both Twitter and Instagram. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.